Hello everyone, welcome to your next chapter and section. In this chapter, we're going to learn a little bit more about, statistics and data frames and how to take an Excel file or a CSV file and run basic mathematical operations and statistics on it. So half of your class is going to be learning about this package called Pandas, which is used for, CSV and data manipulation and analysis. We're going to learn about a data frame object, which is this is going to be similar kind of stuff that you'll learn in other languages when you're dealing with, files of data that you need to process. So a lot of the things that you'll learn from this are extendable to other languages because we kind of use similar tricks because they seem to make the most sense to data scientists at the moment. So I'm hoping by the end of this chapter, you're going to learn a little bit about statistics and how to manipulate data frames and pandas. Pandas is super useful for jobs. You're going to see a lot of jobs saying you need to have some familiar with pandas if it's working with Python and data science. So it's definitely a skill that is going to be useful for you in the future. So what are you going to learn? We're going to learn how to import our pandas functions. We're going to play with, remember how we installed pandas last chapter using pip? If you haven't done that, please do that. We are then going to play with pandas data frames for a little bit. I'm going to show you how to load in some data. I'm going to show you how to create a basic data frame and then, do some basic manipulation, indexing, and all that kind of stuff. So data frame, what is a data frame? It's an object in Python that it's basically like an Excel table. It has rows and columns that you can access using specific commands and do very, similar kind of like Cody related Excel type logic and operators on it if you'd like. You can do for loops on them and you can do, basically anything that we've learned from Python previously up until now can be applied to a pandas data frame object. So with that, guys, let's move into our syntax where we're going to play a little bit with pandas data frames. I'm going to talk to you about how indexing and slicing works. Okay, as you see here, our first line is our import function, or import command. Remember, we learned about this last chapter. In order to import something, we simply say import, and we figure out what the name of the package is in Python. You can go to help, and that module's spam command can help you with that, or the documentation from the website that you downloaded some new function from, or library from. It'll usually tell you what it's labeled as in the documentation somewhere. Lastly, we're renaming this as PD, so we don't have to write pandas every time we want to call a pandas function. It's just easier to type 2 letters than it is to type 6 here. And that's just a common thing that a lot of people do with pandas is they just call it PD. Okay, so this next line is how we create a data frame. We're creating a data frame called df. We are using the assignment operator here, and here is the command we're using to load in data using pandas. We're specifically going to load in a CSV file that I'm providing to you guys. Very simple data. It's only 7 rows. Make sure you save that file in your Udemy Python script folder, okay? In this example, I'm assuming that you're already in Python in that folder directory, but I'm going to show you how to do that even if you're not. So this is how we load in some data here. We just go, read CSV, and we give it the name of the file that we're reading in, and I'm calling it test data here. This next line talks about how to index specific rows. So what this line says is, remember that when we index, we start from 0 in Python. So the first row is 0. So this is saying I want all columns for rows 1 to up to 3. So this will go 1 to 2 here. And it'll give all of the column information for those rows. Okay. If we wanted to give specific columns, let's say there are a dozen columns and we don't want all that information, how do we go about doing that? We would use the .lock function. That is a function that you can use on a pandas data frame if you go into the help menu and look at the object or the documentation around that. So what we do is this is separated by a comma. So the first set of values are the rows that we want. We can ask for 1 row, multiple rows, exclude certain rows, you name it. and then we provide the columns that we want. I'm only asking for one column in this example, but I will show you how to access multiple columns in the next section once we start playing with Pandas. So the syntax for finding a row, specific rows and specific columns in Pandas is using the dot location function, using square brackets after location, providing the rows that we want using the index methods that we're already familiar with, and providing the columns that we want after the comma, okay? So last but certainly not least, let's say you want to do a for loop. You want to iterate across these rows and do some nifty calculations. You know, maybe throw an if statement in there that's like, okay, if this value is above, 32, run some other operation than if it's below 32. Let's say there's an age column, so you want to look at like the differences between people above 30 or under 30, and you could like have different math for older people than younger people or something like that. So the next thing in order to do that is using the .iterRows function here. Okay, so what that function does is it creates a list of lists. So at first there's one list, and every list within that list, every element is basically a row of data. Get 1, 3, 5. Let's say there was like columns, column 1, column A, B, C. So this first row, what it'll do is it'll give you an index value, so the first what row number it is, and then this list of values which represent all of the values in that specific row. So this df.iterRows is clearly creating a list because we can do a for loop on it. And it also is stopped here with colon. And then everything that happens afterwards, of course, is what we do to that each element, each list in that embedded list of data. Okay, guys, so let's hop into Python now and see what we got going on there and play with this a little bit more. So here we are here, guys. Welcome. So first thing we need to do is import pandas. So we're going to import pandas. That's the syntax for this. We usually import at the beginning when we're first building our scripts because we want to use those functions later on. So we're going to import pandas as PD, and now it takes a little bit of a moment to load. Now if we go .pd, we go pd dot, and then press tab, it's going to tell you all the different functions that are available within Pandas. We're going to work with the read CSV function right here. So we're going to go read CSV, and you might not have seen it, but I'm actually still in my root directory here. So even though I'm supposed to go test data.csv, it's not going to work. Why? Because it can't find the file. It's not in that folder. So in order to get to that folder, in my case, it was in I made my Udemy Python scripts folder in my desktop folder. I go desktop / Udemy Python scripts / and look at that. It actually does load a data frame. This is the output. There was no error. But I didn't save that to a variable. So let's go back up here and go df equals. And now we have a Python or Pandas data frame stored as df. That does exist now. So with that, let's start playing a little bit with manipulating this data frame. First, let's start with our first indexing method, which is just getting specific rows. That gets the first and up to the third, so the first and second rows here. And that's what we looked at before. This is very similar to how you would do something like this for a list or a string. You'll also notice that here are the columns for this data frame. So we can access, column information for name, age, or weight, and this is saying that there are 7 rows. This 0 to 6 is like the index position for each of these rows. So what happens if we want just the name and weight of this data frame for for these 3 rows, or these 2 rows rather. So we use that .location function where we first pass in the rows that we want to give it. We're saying 1 to 3. We then separate that with a comma to say now we want to tell you what columns we want to give it, and that works like that there. So you also notice that using the .location function, this doesn't go up to 3. It just says I want positions 1 to 3. Okay, so that's an important thing to consider there. The next thing we want to check is what if we want multiple columns, okay? If we want multiple columns, we have to wrap our column variable here in a list and provide each of the all the columns that we want in that list as the next element of dot location. What happens when we do that? Okay, so you notice that age returns some weird information. So NaN. What this means in Python or in Pandas is that this is not a number. Effectively, this means that this cell is empty. If it was an Excel sheet, for instance, that's Pandas' way of saying this is an empty thing. Why didn't this work? We have age here. Well, it's because it's case sensitive. I had a lowercase a, and this is definitely an uppercase A. So now the numbers come in fine. So I wanted to show you basically how that all works, because the case sensitivity is important, and knowing what NaN means is also important. Lastly, let's see what happens when we iterate across this data frame. So we had to put in, when we do the iter rows function in for a for loop, we have to provide the index and value. If you look at the documentation, it'll definitely say that. Index is going to tell you what the index position is of your row, and the value is going to tell you all this information here, 1, 2, 3, as a list. So value is going to come in as an embedded list, and each iteration is one list with all of the value, all the information in it. So df for index and value in df.iterRows : now remember, our for loop syntax is for, the variables in our iteration, in the object we are iterating across. Now what we're going to do is we're going to print the index, but we're also going to print the value, and you're just going to see what comes out of this, and I'll explain it. So first off, the index position is printed here, and then we have name, age, weight kind of presented horizontally, and then it says data type object. Okay, so what this is doing is it's printing our index, but it's also printing like a pandas data type that is all of this row of information. So if we wanted to just get this information as a list, we can force list information on, or force this type into a list using the list function. So if we go print index and then list of value, what do we get? Well, this is a lot more easy to read, and now we can actually start to think about how we can do operations with this, with the knowledge that we've gained from chapters 1 to 4. Okay, so with that, guys, I think we should end it here, because now that we have access to information in this pandas data frame, we can actually do things with it, which I want to save for our next section. This was good to get to for now. So what did we learn today, guys? First, we learned how to import pandas and make that package work. We learned how to import data, load some data in and do some basic manipulations with it, where we are asking for row location indexes as well as row and column. And lastly, we learned how to iterate across all rows, so we can do some fancy, conditional statements or analysis later down the line. In our next section, we're going to spend a lot more time with pandas data frames. It's a two-parter, so we're going to learn a little bit more in terms of advanced functions and some of the other nifty things we can do in pandas. So with that in mind, guys, catch you later.